And you are live.
Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to get started here with the featured panel on OpenSim's role in the future of virtual worlds research and education. We have Joyce Betancourt, Chris Collins, Krista Lopez, Melanie Delker, and Michael Ciccone. We have some questions that we've asked them, and I'm going to just, since in the interest of time, I'm going to just let them start and discuss the questions that they've been asked, just because we've already used a half an hour. Okay, so you guys go ahead and Fleep, start off, and then each of you take a few minutes to talk about the questions that have been asked.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. So my name is Chris Collins, otherwise known as Fleep Tuque in many of these virtual environments. And first, I just want to thank all the conference organizers and streaming team and everyone for putting this event on. I think we're all very honored to be here today. I believe the first question that we were asked is, in what way has the Open Simulator Community Conference extended the voice of educators using Open Simulator grids? And I think what we're going to try to do here is have those of us on the panel sort of have a conversation instead of everybody just answering the question. So I'll open it up to the panel. How do you guys feel like the Open Simulator Conference has helped educators?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, jump in.
Hello, everybody. I'm Krista, also known as Diva. So I would hope that the conference in September have had the effect of bringing people around OpenSim together and at least give a good idea for what it is possible, what it is technically possible to do in OpenSim these days. In fact, so the conference was very successful. It went without any major glitches. So that you know, and I know that many of you are educators, one thing that we were just talking on the back channel here is that the conference center is a server that works here. It's here hosted at UCI. And I have that server available for events like these. So it was just too bad that we didn't really coordinate this better, because this kind of event could have actually happened over the conference center grid. So if anybody wants to at any point organize events that are education related, just talk to me and maybe we can arrange something. And I think it's a good focus to make these kinds of events stable and more happen with a little bit more reliability, which will be important as we go.
Yeah, and I guess I would say that, in Second Life, there are things like centralized search and the sled list. There's a large sort of organized community of educators and lots of organizations like, ISTE and the Virtual Worlds Education Roundtable and other groups that have sort of pulled that Second Life education community together. And while some of those organizations, I think, also extend to Open Simulator groups and projects and people, I would say that, I think the distributed nature of OpenSim grids means that lots of times we're working in our individual grids and, don't have quite as many opportunities to maybe get out and see what everyone else is doing. So at least for me, the OpenSim conference last year, introduced me to a whole bunch of projects that I didn't even know were going on. And I think that those kinds of events where we can all sort of come together and share our work and what we've learned and, best practices, not only gives us new ideas to try, but also sort of helps us develop that sense of community so that we can continue between conferences to continue to keep in touch and share information with each other. So I think that's been, very helpful. Other thoughts from the panel?
To jump from that, I definitely think, at least from the educational side of things and also from the nonprofits, those of us who were, say, getting for a while the educational discount that then was taken away in Second Life and brought back, there was a lot of kind of exodus and sort of people went to various open sims and other technologies. And I think the Open Simulator Conference allowed, like as you said, Chris, that ability to kind of come back together and share the things that other people were doing. Because a lot of projects, especially some of the educational and maybe like social health focused ones, tend to be on sort of closed or private or singular grids. So I think it definitely gave the opportunity for people to come together and be able to share what they were working on in a way that, like as you said, VISTI and VWER and all those sort of things still existed in Second Life. This was kind of I think one of the first kind of big pushes of bringing that sort of community into play, of people being able to do that in Open Simulator.
Great. The next question for the panel came, let's see, what do you feel are the greatest advantages of Open Simulator over Second Life or over, other virtual environment platforms?
I can jump in too?
Yep, go right ahead.
Yep, go ahead.
Well, for me is that it's an amazing thing that it actually works pretty well, and it's completely under our control, and that's like nothing that I've ever had before. So, while it's good to have large worlds like Second Life and some of the other open sim grids, where you have very large communities, for actually doing sort of day-to-day interaction and collaboration, these individual sort of indie servers, I think, are really the key. I mean, I have been working incessantly over my virtual lab with my students and some of my collaborators all over the world, and it just works really, really well. I mean, we just had a panel last week with about 15 people. It wasn't a panel; it was a poster session that we sort of went poster to poster, and it just worked. I mean, remarkably well. It's just unbelievable. So it's just the fact that you can run your own server, your own virtual world on your, under your control. You can control who's there and who's not there, and that is something like I haven't seen in any other platform before.
Yeah, and for me, the Second Life, first of all, I think, this is my personal opinion. I think Second Life has a brand problem. If any of my university administrators have heard of Second Life, their opinion is not a positive one. And so even the sort of, resistance to that brand has been a real issue for me on my campus. So I think that's one issue. And the other issue is being able to run it on our own university servers, allayed a lot of the concerns about security and who has access. And as Krista mentioned, the ability for us to determine when we were upgrading and what features we were turning on or turning off, what we were going to allow students to do. I think for educators, particularly if you're in a K through 12 environment where you really have to have a much greater level of control of what can happen in the virtual space, hands down, Open Simulator is the most configurable, stable, and you can run it on your own server. And I think that that's an affordance that maybe people don't appreciate enough in terms of being able to monitor and keep control of the environment, and especially in that K through 12 environment when you're working with minors and you have parental concerns, that gives you the opportunity to have the flexibility of a virtual environment, but sort of better police what's going on in that space.
Yeah, that's certainly the very important thing to have. Another thing, of course, that meshes with that very, very closely is the security of personal and also university data. That on Second Life, it's just no way to be sure that should the company be sold, for instance, that data would not be abused or published or whatever, or maybe just leaked. And that's the very important thing for educators, that it's possible to keep a tight rein on the data and make sure that anything that is of sensitive or confidential nature stays in-house.
And that's a really good point. In regards to data, one of my, as a long time sort of campus administrator in Second Life, one of my longtime complaints was that Second Life did not integrate with any of our existing campus systems, not our learning management system, not our LDAP system. So in terms of being able to scale and provide that at an enterprise institutional level, it just didn't work. And because Open Simulator is open source, that means we have access to the code itself. We can do our own work to integrate, this environment into our campus systems. And I'm hoping to see more schools do that, because being able to access the code directly and have it work and talk to our university systems is a huge deal. And I think will help us provide the service to more students and do it in a way that can be managed at that institutional level, which if any of you are working with your administrators or college deans or school board, you know how important that is to get those metrics and analytics and the things that instructors need for assessment. So I think that's also a really good feature.
Yes, that's certainly something very vital. But there's one more thing that's also very important to consider. It's additional abilities. The code of OpenSim is extensible because it's open source, and something is required that is specific to a task or a subject matter that cannot be done in scripting. Then Open Simulator code allows to make a region module or even modify the core code to do just exactly what is needed to make the endeavor a success.
And jumping off of some of you guys were talking about data, not just the user data and all that sort of security of stuff, but also, the content creation. I mean, I think we all struggled with within Second Life of the ability that assets were locked in, and this kind of goes back to some of what Krista was saying as well, that idea that the content creation is also kind of freed up in that way, and you could take an archive of a build and bring it down and bring it back up when you need it, and sort of be able to take advantage of that that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, import and export content. And so if you're working on a project, it makes it a lot easier to kind of organize and bring in those things. So I think that's another important aspect of Open Simulator as well, in regards to, say, these educational projects.
That's a really good point in terms of collaborative builds. If anybody has coordinated a big student build where you have 20 people contributing prims, and then in Second Life trying to sort of archive or save that, it can just be a nightmare. But in Open Simulator, you can take an OR snapshot file and save all of that build. As the administrator, you can take ownership if necessary. So those kinds of flexibility features really help make this more useful for educators, at least for me. And our campus projects, it's actually been better than Second Life in that regard.
Yeah, even in the best of days in the enterprise level of Second Life, you weren't able to do that. Everything had to be owned by every particular little asset. So that collaborative build aspect really wasn't possible in that kind of way. So yeah, definitely a lot more freedom.
Even though when we found that collaborative building was not all roses when we actually did the conference center. From that have sprung a number of technologies that'll see the light of day at some point that facilitate collaborative building in a manner that hasn't been seen so far.
Yeah,
we're working on that.
That's great. And that Open Simulator continues, the community, the developers in Open Simulator, that they continue to release new features and new abilities in response to community needs. I think that's another sort of differentiator. Not to say that Linden Lab isn't responsive to their user base, but I think they have their own priorities. And because the developer community in Open Simulator, I think, is much closer to the community, I think we end up seeing a lot of features come out much quicker and more closely attuned to what the user base actually wants. And that's also been really great.
Well, Linden Labs has a much more diverse and much larger user base, so obviously their development resources, undoubtedly large as they are still being split up and fragmented, and they cannot necessarily go and take one single group like educators and do so much work for them. With us, many of us are educators. Now, I happen not to be, but I know some of the others are, and I've been helping them out a bit as well. And that is a very important thing to keep in mind. Second Life has a lot of different user interests to care for. And in OpenSim, we can progress these things in a much more focused manner.
We have a question from the floor. Cassius asks, I am not an educator, but would like to introduce my local schools to OpenSim. I think what I need is some sort of lesson plans example. Suggestions?
That's that's a difficult, kind of a difficult topic in the sense that pedagogy in virtual spaces is an area that needs much more research in my opinion. I mean, I think we're starting to develop some best practices, and conferences like this help give us lots of ideas to work with. All of the experiences and panels and sessions going on over the next few days talk a lot about how to deliver good education in these environments, but I don't know that we've yet hit on a one-size-fits-all great plan, in part because it so much depends on the topic. If you're teaching a math class, for example, the kinds of experiences that you want students to be able to have are going to be very different than, maybe a social science or a humanities class, or completely different than an engineering course. So I think to some degree, and somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that there's a one-size-fits-all lesson plan. Having said that, I do think there are some good best practices that we have learned. I think that we've learned that, at a bare level, sort of what we're doing right now, the sage on the stage, PowerPoint presentation in the virtual environment, that's useful for extending to some degree what you can do in virtual environments. But there's so much more that can be done, truly developing interactive experiences that go beyond sort of just recreating what we do in the real world. And I'm hoping that in this conference we'll see, lots of examples of that. Krista, do you have other thoughts? I know you actively teach in OpenSim.
No, I actually don't teach in OpenSim. I use my virtual lab as a collaboration environment, but I never actually taught courses there, so I don't really know how to do those kinds of lesson plans and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you should try.
I would think, I mean, there is still a lot of, I mean, the good thing about a lot of the pedagogy resources thing is some of that translates fairly well from the Second Life sort of stuff. So in regards to just stepping off, and I know, Chris, you and I, under the umbrella of Avicon, have had a lot of conversations, at least on the, kind of re-envisioning some of the resources that were put into play. I worked for Global Kids for many years, and we had a big kind of curriculum that we put together on how to kind of use Second Life and get people up to play with that. And I know, Chris, you started adapting that recently with all the build stuff in regards to OpenSim, and we've been talking about other pieces of that. And unfortunately, there was funding several years back for kind of MacArthur Foundation was kind of putting a bunch of funding at virtual worlds and pedagogy and in this space. But and if anybody remembers back to resed.org, which don't go there now, it's completely gone and dead. But that was kind of a hub for people, for educators to kind of share resources across what they were working on and those sort of things. But I think, I mean, speaking, personally, and like I said, I know Chris and I have talked about this, like, I'd love to kind of see that reignited in a lot of ways. And there definitely are educators out there that I think to turn to look at sort of some of this stuff for inspiration, but to kind of have a place where educators were coming together to share, pedagogy and lesson plans and best practices on a more ongoing basis outside of even these events would be great.
And just as a plug for Sim on a Stick, if you're looking for a really simple way to sort of introduce Open Simulator into your school district or into your lab environment, if you're looking for a really low overhead kind of way to do that, you don't have maybe IT staff support, I think Sim on a Stick is one of the most accessible. You can download the software, put it on a USB key, and it's all right there within that little USB key. You have a whole virtual world that you can give to your students. And, at least in my experience, particularly with younger students, middle school and high school students, they're so entranced by the ability to experiment and play. Sometimes you don't even need a curriculum, depending on what your goals are. If you're trying to just give them some exposure to what virtual worlds might be, and talking about the future of technology or the future of work. If you're just trying to give them some exposure, sometimes just the blank canvas can actually be quite a lot of fun. Any other comments or thoughts on that topic? Okay, if not, the next question. Well, we sort of answered some of this. What type of advice would you give to educators, and what advice would you give to folks who want to be part of the next Open Simulator Community Conference? I think we just sort of talked about, sort of advice for educators. In terms of the 2014 conference, so we're very close to making the announcement for the next conference. The website isn't up yet, but we hope that it will be in the next couple of weeks. Our track leaders are furiously, hopefully, writing their call for proposals, which we expect to go out very shortly. And we're targeting a November conference date, so you can mark your calendars. I think, is that November 8th and 9th? Does anybody remember? We're the steering committee. Does anybody remember the date of our conference?
I think so. I mean, it's that weekend, definitely.
Okay, that's good.
It's 8 and 9, November 8 and 9.
Yep, so you can definitely go ahead and mark your calendars. In terms of getting a proposal accepted, last year Diva was the chair of the research committee. Do you have any thoughts on specifically about researchers who maybe want to contribute?
So the research track last year was perhaps one of the least well attended, and this year I don't have a clear vision for how we should go about it. It seems like there's not a lot of people doing research that would like to be involved. Although I am planning, operations permitting, to organize at least a poster session where people can present their ongoing research work, more research oriented. But it seems that the bulk of the community seems to be in education and in social, and so we should just foster for the conference for those kinds of people. And research will try to sort of do something a little smaller, not take so much time, but maybe do it more asynchronous and do a poster session instead.
The other sort of advice that I would give, last year, the Open Simulator Community Conference, it was the first time we'd ever done it. And we were, very focused on trying to keep this, we were trying to stick with the very basic format of a conference, make sure that the grid stayed up, try to, experiment with the streaming, and just make sure that we could even pull off a successful event. So I think our target last year, we'd set the bar a little lower maybe than we're hoping to set this year. Not that we're going to try to do any really, what's the word I'm looking for? Extravagant or radical changes to last year's format. But I think this year we do want to try to accommodate a little more interactivity and engagement, a little less PowerPoint presentation and everybody sitting around the room. So all technical considerations, aside, if we can make it happen, I think our goal is to give speakers at the conference more opportunities to engage the audience, possibly even pull in parts of or builds. So if you want to present in a build that you already have, we're going to see if we can try to accommodate that. And in terms of putting in proposals, I think the theme this year really is trying to demonstrate all of the great capabilities that Open Simulator has. So, we're really looking for, can you help us help the audience learn about all of the different ways that OpenSim can be used in all of those different topical domains. So whether it's business or, if you're doing community type events, we're looking to really showcase what OpenSim is capable of. Any other comments? Yeah.
In regards to just more general advice, I mean, I think, similar to, I think, any of these larger scale virtual environments, I mean, I think that idea of searching out those that are doing work in the space and communities in the space, I think are a good place for an educator to start to make a jump. I mean, that rings true in Second Life if you were looking for, to go to VISTI or the Virtual Worlds Education roundtable group or those kind of things. And in Open Simulator, there's certainly, there's quite several universities. I mean, some of these are closed, obviously, projects. A good open one that if you want to explore is there's the Vibe community, which is a whole sort of collaborative of numerous like science and other focused educators. I might, encourage you to kind of seek them out. But I think some of that, looking at what other people are doing and maybe, kind of getting involved is a good way to kind of make a first initial kind of foray jump into these spaces too. Beyond what we're talking about, meeting people obviously at, the Open Simulator Community Convention or the people that might be here at VWBPE and working on projects. But I think that finding kind of peers that are working in spaces too is a great way to kind of start that practice and kind of have a community of support for things.
Okay, any other thoughts or comments about that topic?
So to go back to the question about how people can get involved with the conference this year, I would say just submit a proposal. When the call for proposals comes out, just don't be shy. And there's other opportunities also to get involved by volunteering to help. There's all sorts of help that is needed for a large conference to actually work smoothly. We had a small army of volunteers last year, helping out. So that's also a possibility. So there's, I think those are the ways that you could get involved, and we're looking forward for more people to get involved.
Definitely, I agree. And volunteers, if you've done it before, we're always so grateful, and it really helps in the sense that working together in Open Simulator and meeting people from different grids. I mean, that's both the beauty and the curse of Open Simulator, is that because it's so distributed, everybody's out doing their own thing. I met so many wonderful people last year. So if you're ever feeling isolated in your grid, the conference is a really great way to meet lots of wonderful people working in Open Sim. Let's see, the next question. So the next question is, what do you feel are some of your greatest accomplishments as educators and researchers in Open Sim and as organizers of the conference?
If I can start. So some of to jump right from what you said, I mean, for me, especially the idea that for the Open Simulator Community Conference, that we were able to kind of bring together that community at large, because I think the nature of, nature of distributed grids, unless you're really kind of actively looking, it's often not very easy to know who's doing what, right? And I think that conference definitely brought people together to sort of share that. And to me, that's a great accomplishment. I mean, obviously, we were very targeted on making sure that the technology held, right? And that we didn't have any, we tried to minimize problems in regards to sort of lags and crashes and things like that. But the unplannable stuff of really bringing together the community and helping kind of sort of get that crosstalk happening. And I'm sure, Melanie might, probably could talk on what that meant on a developer's level. I think it really spurred some people to start to talk, and the 4096 bug was killed, right? And other things that I think kind of resulted from that. So, but I think that was, at least our biggest accomplishment in my eyes.
So yes, so there were two major different accomplishments. One was on the community side, as Joyce is saying, so that it was great to bring people together and see what everybody was doing. But the other was on the technical side. In fact, one of the reasons why I was so keen to support the conference and to go forward with the conference was to actually give a big jump to the technology and to the stability of OpenSim. Because if we could handle a large event like the conference, then we would be in very good shape to handle smaller ones, which I think are the ones that are really valuable too. So pushing the technology to be able to support a conference for 2 days with a total of about 360 people, and I think during the keynotes, I think that the peak concurrency was about 90 or something like that in the simulators. That was pretty good. I mean, and the servers were just like, not stressed that much. It was, things were kind of rolling very well. And this, what happened is that before the conference, the months before the conference, about 4 months or so, we all sort of came together and decided to squish a bunch of bugs that had been there, that some of us would never even notice because we never really pushed it that far. So the fact that we wanted to push it that far made us go out and fix a bunch of things in the code that weren't working very well. And it's always good to have these kinds of goals, ambitious goals to solve some of these problems. And I think a similar thing is going to happen again this year.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of like Avicon, I wear different hats. So, for the University of Cincinnati, it's always about sort of advocating virtual world platforms for education. And in that regard, I think having a conference, an official conference, always helps me to sort of sell the concept, because I can show that there's a global community of educators investigating this. So, from my University of Cincinnati hat, the conference gave a sense of, I think, legitimacy that at least I found helpful. On Avicon's side, wearing my Avicon hat, Avicon's goal, we previously produced the Second Life Community Convention, the Open Simulator Community Convention. For us, represented the thing that we had been discussing for so many years, that our goal really is the metaverse. Avicon's mission is to really facilitate the development of that broader concept of a future, iteration of the internet, when we'll all be able to travel from world to world, and whether we're doing education or business or personal, that we're looking forward, our eye is on the horizon, and trying to help develop that larger concept of the metaverse. And so in that sense, the Open Simulator ethos of being open source, of being distributed, of being sort of a community developed product, really has, the closest match with that metaverse concept and most of the other platforms out there. Unity 3D, we use that at work too. It's a terrific platform for specific use cases. And I really like Unity. It's a very powerful platform, but it's no closer to the metaverse than World of Warcraft. You're still developing an experience that's self-contained, and Open Simulator is not self-contained. With a hypergrid, we can go from place to place. And so in terms of that continuum towards the metaverse, I felt like the OpenSim conference was a really good push in that direction. I hope this year that we can do more outreach. So I think last year was really about bringing the existing OpenSim community together. And I hope this year that we can maybe go a little bit outside of that existing community and try to pull in people who may have maybe never heard of OpenSim before. And I think that will take, all of you out in the audience and everybody listening on the stream. The conference went really well last year, and knock on wood, it'll go well again this year. And hopefully having that sort of stability, knowing that the event, can go fairly smoothly, hopefully you'll feel empowered to invite others in your professional or personal lives to attend as well. Because, I think in order for OpenSim and the metaverse that we all want to see happen, in order for that to come true, we need to bring more people to the table. And I hope the conference can facilitate that. Sorry, I yacked on for a minute there.
That's all right.
I don't know where we are in terms of time. Any other thoughts on that, or should I go on to the next question, do you think?
I think we're like just
we have 50 minutes left.
Yeah, we're
50.
only the halfway. Yes.
Oh, all right then.
So yak on more.
Really, so we have plenty of time.
Okay.
Although I mean, we still have questions and things, so
yes,
another opportunity for people for us to kind of respond
absolutely
deeper to
Yeah. So
Well,
you
let me
want-
go to the last question on the official list, and then maybe
Before
we can.
I
Yeah.
don't know if there's anything like, I mean, Nebadon doesn't quite have a voice, but I don't know if there's anything that we could speak aloud for him or anything. And I don't know if is Melanie still away?
Yeah, I think Melanie had to run AFK for a second, and when Neb gets his comments into chat, I will read that out for those who may be watching through the stream and can't see the in-world discussion.
Yeah, I mean, he briefly just said that his biggest achievement. Although you go, you can.
There we go. So Nebadon is saying that OSgrid is really a shining example of what Open Simulator can do on a shoestring budget, and that's a really good point in terms of cost. For other platforms, even Unity and other things, they have a free version, but to do the full thing, you have to pay the licensing fee. Since Open Simulator's open source, you can really do that on a truly shoestring budget. And OSgrid, for anybody watching on the stream, I think probably those in world are familiar since we're all on OSgrid. But if anybody's watching on the stream, OSgrid is a sort of in my opinion, it's sort of what I hoped Second Life would be way back in the day. When I thought maybe they were going to open source the server code, that it really is anyone can stand up a region and connect their region to the OSgrid community. So you get the benefits of having a large grid, but also have the benefits of running your own private simulator. And you can open that up as much as you want to the OS community, and I think that is a really great example of how Open Simulator has lots of great benefits. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, and then maybe we can take some audience questions or talk about other topics of interest to the team here. Let's see. So the next question is, what has been your greatest motivation for maintaining a strong presence in OpenSim? So what motivates you guys to be here?
My main motivation right now is that my virtual lab is an absolutely essential tool for my job right now at this point. It's unbelievable. Oops, there's some noise coming in.
Like
somebody is injecting noise.
Yeah, sorry about the technical difficulties. Give us just a second here.
It might be good if others mute who aren't speaking.
Okay, there we go. Go ahead, Krista. Sorry.
All right. So I was saying that my main motivation, I have many kinds of motivations at different scales, but my very concrete, pragmatic motivation is that it really opens. My virtual lab has become an essential part of my tool set for working with my students and some of my collaborators. And it's like nothing that I have accessible. We work on papers and presentations. Just over the past 3 weeks, I've worked with 4 of my students on 4 different papers plus a grant, and it just works. It's fantastic. It's better than PDF and Skype and Google Docs, all not synchronized together. It's just really an incredible tool for collaboration. So that, my very concrete, pragmatic reason for wanting to continue to develop OpenSim is to make my virtual lab even better. And I mean, there are bigger reasons, not so pragmatic. The fact that Oculus Rift is coming in and we can actually experience these environments in 3D, that is really an exciting thought for me. And there's some challenges there of how to integrate the GUI, the 2D GUI into those other interfaces. But those are all good challenges, and so that's sort of what also keeps me moving.
Joyce, do you want to What keeps you motivated to be an open simulator besides me poking you?
Well, I mean, obviously, I've been kind of on the outskirts exploring and experimenting with Open Simulator, but not as deep, and certainly not on the back end as everybody else on the panel. I mean, I think my motivations always kind of come from the real kind of like the user side of things. I have a great shirt in Second Life that I have to remake in OpenSim that says, basically an I fight for the user, which obviously comes right out of Tron. But I really kind of come from that approach and feel that way. The community to me is a big motivator across kind of all spheres. Some of this speaks to what Chris was talking about. Chris and I obviously run Avacon, so like if I put on that hat, that larger goal of kind of supporting those of us, the user base of people that are working in these platforms and using these platforms, whether they be for work or social or cultural reasons or whatever it is. So that's a kind of one piece of it, and to kind of further that kind of that idea of community. There are a lot of there still are a lot of amazing people in community that is in Second Life, and I think there's a lot of us that jump back and forth. Even in Second Life, I still run the weekly meetings for Nonprofit Commons, and that has led to a lot of ways of how do we, and for kind of my kind of personal mission, right? Like how do we bridge that gap of those of us who are, could be working in Second Life or could be here in OpenSim, or even as Chris was saying, maybe you're using Unity or World of Warcraft in your classroom or for a project. Like how do we all kind of continue to stay together? And this sort of maybe goes back to that conversation about a larger community of practice, sort of a little bit of what ResEd was trying to do, but still was sort of very nascent. And I think as much as we can, we're always kind of coming from that point of view and trying to push that in the Avacon side of things, thus like obviously collaborating with Overt Foundation in the Open Simulator convention and kind of putting that on. I think that one of our kind of one of our next kind of pushes in regards to Avacon is we're in the midst of developing our grid. I mean, I think some people at least here do, others on the stream. This is kind of our sort of presence in the space, and it's still very much in development. And I'm sure Chris can talk to that a little bit more as well on the what that means on the back end of things. But sort of to really kind of making this not only a hub for our own kind of workplace in the metaverse, but also to be able to invite the community in and to sort of have meetings of practice and things like that. And to that effect, we're also going to be launching kind of launching a program where those working on sort of social good related topics, nonprofits or cultural focused things or those sort of things, to be able to use that as a jumping off space and offer up some free space within our grid. So that's another thing that we're kind of developing in the moment, and in hopes to kind of get more people to explore and work with us, and kind of currently that's sort of an umbrella of a social good in the metaverse, and that's my cat. Well, obviously has something to say about this too.
Thanks, Joyce. Yeah, I just to echo that concept, I think. I mean, my personal motivations and Joyce's motivations are very closely aligned, which is part of the reason why we work so well together. But I guess for me, I came from a very rural place. I grew up in the sticks. We didn't even have, for U.S. people, there was no PBS where I grew up. I was very isolated as a kid, and so when I found the internet and BBSs and MUDs and things back in the text days, it was just a miraculous thing. And I guess that wonder and that excitement about being able to meet other people and collaborate on projects together, for me, that's what keeps my interest in this field going. And with both Avacon and our various projects, I think our goal is really to extend this opportunity to more people. And a lot of the folks in this room are geeky folks. We're geeky people. We're pioneers in this space, and we have some of those technical skills. But acknowledging the power of these platforms and bringing that to people who maybe aren't as technical, and trying to bring that conversation between the developers and the users of a platform to try to help improve the interface or the experience so that it is more accessible to more people, I think is another part of our big goal. And I don't want to leave out Nebadon, who's poor Neb, it doesn't have voice, so I do want to read his response. He says, for me, my main motivation is this is how I earn a living with Open Simulator. So my comment, that's great, Neb. He's working with a lot of companies, including Incitra and For Dialogue, who are business partners. And they're developing 3D models of cities for transportation studies and urban development. Nebadon's also working with us at Avicon to help us with our grid. And he's also working on a project through the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which I'm also associated with. And that's in terms of extending this kind of technology to new people, Neb and I and others are working to develop essentially a research institute that will bring kids and high school students and undergraduates into the virtual environment to do research. So we're looking at exploring, I think, the term MOOC. Somebody asked me in the chat, what does MOOC mean? If you haven't heard the term, it stands for Massively Open Online Courses. And the MOOC wave has sort of washed across higher education. It's essentially, large groups of students coming online to take classes through like a learning management system on the web. And that's really exciting. But we're looking at, can we extend the same concept to research instead of just courses? So can we facilitate massively open online research projects and use the virtual environment to bring researchers together, subject matter experts from different schools, universities, academia, military? And can we bring those researchers in to work with high school and undergraduate students to get them involved with research very early on in their academic careers? So, those kinds of projects are really exciting. Thinking about using this technology to not only expose younger students to virtual worlds, but also to expose them to how to conduct research, and hopefully help keep them in that STEM pipeline so that they do that for a lifelong career. I think that's a really great thing to be working on. So Neb, hopefully I'm translating your words here. I hope I did an okay job. You'll have to tell me if not.
That's great.
So I think that takes us to the end of our set questions, which means I think we can open this up. I'm watching on the live stream channel as well as here in World. So if you have questions for the panel, please feel free to let us know. And in the interim, I have a question because Krista has been working very much. What do you think about the Oculus Rift, Krista, and what impact that will have on these kinds of platforms?
Oh man, the Oculus Rift is a game changer for these environments. Because one thing is to experience these pseudo 3D environments in a 2D screen, which is very nice, but it's sort of lacking. And another thing is to actually experience them immersively. And I don't know how many people here have experienced, but it's really truly amazing. I mean, they have a few major challenges still left to solve, like the feeling of sickness. But they are definitely working on that. They're improving their headsets to account for certain movements that turned out to influence the way that our bodies perceive, navigation through an environment, and that's what makes us go sick. So it's just amazing, and I think that's really the future. That's where we should be going. We should be looking for these immersive virtual environments because it really brings a human perspective to these online worlds that is very much lacking from things like Facebook and Twitter and whatnot, and these basically one-dimensional communities that are based on in interactions over text. We are clearly on the verge of something else, which is a global planet, a global humankind that can form these ad hoc communities all over the world. And I have a feeling that the 3D immersion is going to be absolutely critical to not to lose the humanity that we see happening. Losing humanity, we see that happening in online forums. It's really distressing. And I have a feeling that adding the 3D dimension, the spatial component here is going to ameliorate some of those problems.
What's really hysterical is the first time I put on Rift, the first thing that I did, I was talking with Nebadon in chat, and he teleported me over to OSgrid, and I was awestruck. I mean, I really was awestruck because you've seen these environments through this little window on your monitor for years and years and years, and we're all very familiar with what OpenSim and Second Life looks like. But somehow you put this thing on your head, and you're really in the environment. And then once I started going over to like places that I have built myself, it was truly there are a few experiences that I've had in life where I had that oh my gosh moment, and that was one of them. And what was really funny is so many things that look perfectly in proportion and scale on your screen. You get the Rift on and suddenly the refrigerator is for a giant, or you start noticing all of these environmental details that aren't quite as apparent when you're looking at it through the monitor screen. So for years and years and years, I think those of us working in education, we've always talked about how these virtual environments, it's the sense of presence. That's what makes this different from just being on a website and having a video conference or something. It's that feeling that we're actually all here together in a place, and that the Rift amplifies that feeling by a million. I think Krista's right that it's a game changer, and it's not the Rift itself. I'm hopeful that Facebook buying the Rift. Of course, my immediate reaction was, oh no, but I think it also does legitimize the space, and I hope that there will be lots of competitors to the Rift, and that it's not just the Rift; it's also Sixth Sense, and Philip talked about some of these other sort of motion detection devices that will help us maybe communicate more naturally in these environments. And I think once the consumer gets a hold of that, once it's in your living room, I'm hopeful that that will help with some of those fear barriers about virtual environments. If in the relative safety of your own home, you can put on a Rift and sort of get your virtual sea legs, I'm hopeful that that will help people feel a little less fearful of virtual environments as a whole.
I definitely agree from my experience, even more limited than, you actually have a development kit, Fleep, just that sense of presence is amped up. There are definitely, there's some comments, if you're looking at the comments in the chat, there's a lot of people talking about how there's the downside to that. Obviously, the idea of if you're susceptible to motion sickness, or the possibilities of being vertigo and those sort of things. And I think just like there's the need to tweak on the UI side of things, that's another kind of issue I think that needs to be worked out for these kind of devices, for virtual reality headsets and the like. But definitely that sense of immersion. Even when I was trying it out, the Smithsonian had a conference at the end of the year that was sort of all about them digitizing their content and even like rolling out in 3D. And they had a very laser scanned environment that came from a dig site in South America for an archaeological dig site, and I remember walking through it in the Oculus and like getting to the edge of like a pit that had been one of the dig pits, and like looking down, and you still have that it triggers those same senses where you feel like, oh my God, I'm at the edge of a hole and I might fall in. So I think definitely that sense of immersion will is something that will kind of up the ante in all these spaces.
We do have a question from the audience. Orinoco Westland asked, "How do we encourage a greater commitment to accessibility as we make advances in the OpenSim environment?" And in chat, Nebadon responded that one way is through things like the Open Simulator Community Conference. Getting more people, involved in knowing that the conference is there is one way that we can talk about accessibility issues and start to develop. I mean, I think the community in Second Life has done quite a lot to educate, builders and space developers how to be more accommodating for people with a wide range of different accessibility issues, and I think those kinds of best practices, we need to continue to talk about them and communicate them with each other and develop good ways to address the issues. And I think maybe, for maybe Melanie, if she's back, or Diva can talk about on the development side. But even in world, there were lots of tips and tricks just as a builder working on campus projects that I really wasn't even aware of. And I think if you are a builder, you have to seek that information out. I think we all have a responsibility, and that's part of it, is making sure that people understand that everybody who's building in this space or creating an environment has a responsibility to try to make that as accessible as possible. And so that requires you to, that means you have, the onus is on you to try to go out and find out what the best ways to do that are. So I think instilling that sense of responsibility in builders and developers is part of that.
Yeah, and certainly some quick tips on that. Obviously, like if you're interested in that, the same universal design principles that would work with, real life architecture are still very applicable in virtual environments. So, seek out that if you're looking to make sure that your environments kind of are more accessible. And then even simple things like anybody who's accessing this space that might be, vision impaired and is using a screen reader or anything like that, try to make sure all your objects aren't named object. I think that's a kind of a real simple thing that everybody can do. And so that way the environment is a little bit more approachable, sort of sensible kind of building practices that help aid in the accessibility angle. Yes, and Cudworth, as a grid inspector was talking about, her design book does go into that. And I'm not sure if it's lodged yet, and then she also spoke at Open Simulator Community Convention. So if you look, she had 2 panels she actually presented. So if you look at our archives, which I'll try to find the links for.
I'll get the link here in a second.
Yeah, so there's a couple of good panels that she put in there that are kind of these overall, how to really kind of build effectively and universally in virtual environments. Those are great watches to kind of to approach from this. I definitely think some of these other accessibility tools we were talking about, like the idea that we're using voice now and somebody has to transcribe this. That's still how do we how do you kind of take from the voice and put it there. There's still some of those things that we have to kind of be cognizant of, and and as Fleep was saying, maybe Krista, you have points on how maybe to make that user experience more accessible while developing the platform. I don't know.
Yeah, so I have two things to say about accessibility. One is, the stronger meaning of accessibility, which means to make it accessible for people who have disabilities. So last week when I had the poster session on my virtual lab, there was one of the participants was a student in Italy who has developed his own viewer for OpenSim, and he's blind, like completely blind. So apparently he's in computer science and he was able to somehow write code. I don't really know how. But so he developed his own viewer for OpenSim that relies on a text-to-speech transcription of what the scene has. So having the objects actually have meaningful names is the critical component there between him being able to navigate and him not being able to navigate. And that was just an amazing experience to actually have the poster session last week with him basically following the rest of us on his viewer. And he didn't get lost. He was able to follow us wherever we were going, and he was able to participate. He actually presented the poster about his viewer. It was quite amazing, very eye-opening for me. So that is one thing to, when people build these scenes, as Joyce said, giving meaningful names to the scene objects, it's sort of a starter that is absolutely critical for people with disabilities. And then
it's
in
pretty
general,
good idea to do that anyway.
Yeah,
Because when the objects chat and it's like object says this and that, you go like, huh?
Yes. So, and then another more general, not necessarily for people with disabilities, but in general, one thing about my own experiences of building these collaboration environments is that, you have this blank slate environment that you can build things with. And when you assume that people are experts in manipulating the camera and the very difficult sort of hand-eye coordination things that need to happen for you to be effective here, then you don't need to worry about how to design things. But when you are designing for people who don't necessarily know anything about this interface at all, like most people, except a few, then you really have to think very carefully about what kind of experience you're going to throw people in. So, for example, sitting down on chairs is a typical example. You sit down on chairs, and if you don't do anything, the camera is placed God knows where. And the person sitting down, if the person doesn't know how to move the camera, then that person is lost forever. You just lost that person. So on the other hand, it is possible to script these environments so that they do the right thing for people who are not very familiar with the interface. So, script the chairs so that they place the cameras in a reasonable spot, make things very easy for people who are not familiar. Basically, what this environment gives us is a blank slate for us to create our own environments. And it's responsibility of people who create the environments to actually make it accessible for people who are not familiar with the base interface, which is very confusing. So I would strongly recommend people to make heavy use of scripts to placing cameras, guiding the cameras through specific things that people should be looking. So basically make it more constrained than what it really is, because it's so unconstrained that it's very easy for people to get completely lost. So you have to constrain it.
Thanks, Krista. That's good feedback. I do have another question. This one's maybe sort of for Krista. What is the future of hypergrid, and how do you think that will benefit education?
Well, I mean, the hypergrid is up and running. People are using it. I was really pleased to see at the conference in September, there were about almost like 40 different grids, 40 different origins that people came from, which is really amazing and very rewarding for me personally. So things are working. There's still work to do, in terms of content protection and people being able to express what is it that they okay with sharing and not okay with sharing, and all of that will be done as some of us have more time during the year, but it's a work in progress kind of thing. And I personally, I think it's absolutely critical, because I, as I said, I'm very sort of control freak. I like to be in my virtual lab, my virtual environment. That's my thing, and that's my identity. And unfortunately, I was not able to jump from there today here because this region was having problems. So I had to log into OSgrid, but it's very rarely that I log into other grids. I operate from my own virtual lab, and I go from there to wherever I need to go. So I think it's just, the idea of federation, the federation of servers and federation of virtual worlds is really, I think, a critical component moving forward. I very much believe in decentralization. I don't believe in centralized services, big things like Facebook or Twitter or GitHub or I just don't. The older I get, the less I believe in those kinds of things. The internet was designed to be a decentralized system, and that's what we should be investing, because that's what makes people be responsible for what they own and work well with people in similar but different organizations. So I'm a very firm believer of decentralization.
They're calling you out as the hypergrid hero in the chat, which is great. In some ways, you know you are kind of the one of the mothers of the metaverse concept in Open Simulator for kind of creating and really pushing to develop hypergrid.
Yes, and I would say, for educators in particular, I think one of the most accessible ways that new educators can sort of get a sense of what's possible in these environments is, the proverbial virtual field trip to go see what content is already out there. And in the sense that the hypergrid really is what makes that possible in Open Simulator. I also see the Open Simulator's ability to allow you to take your avatar and your identity. So, from a school server, you can have your students with their same account and their same inventory, travel around to other locations in the metaverse and show them what's possible. So, there are people like Peter Graham doing great stuff in biology and the Vibe projects with Stephen Zootfly. There are lots of fantastic things out there. If you're in literature, just the most fantastic science fiction builds you have ever seen. And those are great places to take your students to visit. Oh, we're getting a little bit of audio interruption there, but I think in that sense, the hypergrid opens up the metaverse to your classroom. And think that's a great way to sort of get started if you're just new to this environment and you're trying to figure out how do I bring my students in. That's a great way to take them out and show them what's possible.
So you know what? I apologize, but I actually need to go because I have some face-to-face meetings on campus, and I just cannot stay anymore. But thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope to see you all some other time in the probably in the conference center.
Thanks so much, Krista.
So for people who are, I think we're getting weird noise too. I don't know if somebody needs to mute. Okay. For people in the chat that were talking about sort of liking to see sort of some conference that might be a mashup of some of these accessibility angles and the educational stuff and all that. I mean, I really encourage you in some ways that Open Simulator Community Convention that, we're all part of. Like, speaking of distributed, it really is a community model. So it can be what you make it, right? So anybody who's interested in wanting to see these topics, I mean, we haven't, soon we'll be, kind of releasing the call for proposals and that sort of stuff. Like, I challenge you all to kind of step up and own that. So if you want to see topics and people's work presented that's on accessibility, or if you want to see sort of other key things, it is, definitely, multi-tracked as I was mentioning in chat. So it isn't just from that technical point of view for anybody who didn't experience it last year. And so, I think it has the ability to be shaped in that way. I don't know if you want to give any, kind of overall recap, since you're kind of, Chris, since you're sort of chairing the the development of the content of that committee.
Sure. Well, the website for the conference is conference.opensimulator.org. It's still showing the content from last year, but if you keep an eye on that website, if somebody could type that into chat for me, it's conference.opensimulator.org. We will definitely have the call for proposals and the announcement up in probably a week or so. And we'll also do a call for volunteers. So anyone is welcome. And if you're, for people watching on the stream, if you're mostly a Second Life user and you haven't had a good excuse to sort of start to explore OpenSim, the conference is a really great way to do that because we have lots of folks around who can sort of help you make that transition from platform to platform. And, definitely in terms of the accessibility and those issues and education, I think those are topics that are very timely. And I would encourage you guys to put together a panel or put together a proposal. We're also going to make room in the schedule for maybe some worky group workshop types of activities. So if, you want to get a group of, somebody said in chat, birds of a feather. Yeah, if you want to facilitate a birds of a feather style meetup about these topics, keep your eyes peeled for that call for proposals. There will be a track, content and community, that Dan Banner is chairing that would probably be a terrific fit for those kinds of proposals. And we will certainly keep an eye out for those, because that's really, the goal of the conference. I mean, it's one of those things where these conferences, you don't want it to be just everybody getting together and talking once a year. As a conference organizer, my goal is always, my hope is that the conference is the start of a conversation, not the end of the conversation. I'm always hopeful that it's a place for you to meet other people who share your passion, so that you guys can find each other in this big, broad metaverse, and then hopefully continue to work on the things that drive your interest throughout the year. So we definitely want to facilitate that with OSCC.
Yeah, and we have some great people, like you said, that were cheering up some of the things. I mean, we've brought up Vibe a couple times. Stephen Zudfly is actually leading up the education sort of track of the conference. So, that's another person that, if you want to reach out in regards to sort of ideas, seek him out. Cynthia Cologne, Lear Lobo, for those who would know her in Second Life, is helping out in regards to kind of that overall, some of these things that break outside of the paradigm and that experiential kind of learning. And so if you have an idea for like wanting to show off your work, or an interesting way to kind of interact and engage with the overall Open Simulator community convention folks and the people attending, then, seek out her. Who else are we missing? You brought up Dan. And who else is?
So the conference, the track leader chairs, Justin Clark Casey, of course, will be chairing the developer and open source track. Dan Banner will be chairing the content and community track. Maria Korolov will be chairing business and enterprise. And I think you mentioned Stephen is chairing the education. We did reduce the number of tracks this year, so we're going to have a little bit fewer tracks in the hopes that helps more cross-pollination between tracks. And Cynthia Cologne, Lear Lobo, is sort of taking on this grand challenge of a learning lab. So we're hoping to have some more kind of real-time learning experiences, maybe some speed builds, other kinds of, hands-on learning on the grid. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. And then Key Gruen will be assisting with some of the, kind of gamification concepts. How can we make sure that, people at the conference really get out and explore all of the great content there? So I think it's going to be a really great conference this year. And we really encourage everybody in the OpenSim community to participate in however fits best with your work. But the idea here is really about cross-pollination. How do we get all the great things happening, all the good ideas and experiments and all the things that people are trying on their grids? How do we share that information so that we can all sort of move OpenSim forward? So I'm going to take one more question. I'm scanning the chat. If you have a last question, go ahead and pop it in.
While you're doing that too, somebody had just mentioned a brief thing, like how do they kind of get involved, at least in the who do they talk to about helping or help out or offers for Avacon. So Chris and I, along with Kathy, are kind of the three that are head up the board of Avacon. So, I mean, ultimately, you can reach out directly to us. We are obviously, it's an all volunteer army in essence. What Avacon does, similar to Overt being, really a user distributed kind of like content. Code kind of repository, but they're doing like it's similar in our case. It's an all volunteer army. So if you're interested in helping out in that, reach out to us. If you have we have some more formal, hey, we're looking for these kind of volunteer stuff that are listed on the site. I don't know if you have any other brief thoughts on that before we grab that last question.
No, I saw some chat there. Avacon, we really work on beyond the Open Simulator conference, also facilitating. For example, we have a call for proposals right now for the Metaverse Cultural Society, the Metaverse Cultural Series rather. So we're always looking for volunteers for those events as well. And again, both OpenSim, Second Life, even other platforms, we're interested in really supporting that concept of the metaverse. So if you share a passion for those topics, we are always, looking for active volunteers, and you can sign up at our website, avicon.org. So the last question, I'm going to take the last question. I'm going to ask the last question because I've been asking all of the keynote speakers at these various conferences because I think and I want to answer it myself because I keep asking. And the question is, do you feel that sort of resistance to broad adoption of the metaverse, do you feel like that's mostly because of technical challenges or social challenges? And I have disagreed with Philip and with maybe Justin to some degree. I think Justin's answer was a little of both. I really feel like those of us who are passionate about the metaverse have double duty. On one level, we're bringing people in and we're teaching them how to use the interfaces and we're showing them the technology, and there are definitely lots and lots of technical barriers. But I also think that we have a really unique position to sort of set the stage in that cultural expectation way. There are lots of soft skills in these virtual environments that we don't end up talking about very much. Things like etiquette, things like helping them orient themselves. Where do I fit into this online community of people who may look like zebras or not even like humans, which can be very scary and very overwhelming if you don't have previous experience. So I personally feel like the social and cultural barriers to the metaverse and virtual worlds are, if not more important than the technical, just as important. And I think that, for those of us who are sort of geeky and technically minded, thinking about those social issues is also part of our job. And that we have to sort of not just teach them how to use the interface, but teach them how to think about the opportunities that the metaverse and virtual worlds present. Because, the truth is I can teach somebody how to click through a really complex menu. And that's difficult, but it's not nearly as difficult as explaining to them why they should want to learn. What is it about these virtual environments that's going to bring some benefit to their life, that will give them more opportunities, whether that's economic or personal or experiencing, things that they can't experience in real life. And sometimes I feel like as a technical community and people who are very enmeshed in the deep guts of the technology, that we sometimes forget about that other part of our job, which is really, it's not how to do it, it's why you want to. And so, that's my plug, that I hope, moving forward in your classrooms or wherever, that you don't focus just on the technology, but on the human connections that the technology enables, and what richness that can really bring to people's lives. And I think that's the harder thing to solve. I don't know. What do you guys think on the panel? Any thoughts about that?
I'm certainly in your boat, right? I think beyond the technology aspect, because technology will advance. There'll be more tools. There'll be more development. Those sort of things, as you said, you can kind of adapt to and learn in that kind of, at least in a technical level. And even in related things, we mentioned the whole Oculus Rift. During the recent acquisition to Facebook, there were quite a few interesting kind of points of views and articles and that people wrote about it. And one of the probably most interesting that kind of almost dovetails with some of what we're talking here is for those who are familiar, Rafe Koster, who he actually ran the virtual world MetaPlace for a while. He wrote an very kind of interesting article that I think really took on that idea that it's not about sort of the latest technology in that way. It's really kind of about the users. Of course, he was also going further that it's about who owns the data to the users, which really mirrors some of the stuff that we're talking here about, supporting an open, an open source kind of environment. But I think I'll look for that URL. But I think it's a kind of a broad, I think, good approach to some of this. But I definitely agree that the human aspect, that how do you kind of become good stewards of kind of bringing people in and helping them through that kind of process. And ultimately, if we want to see any of this stuff, not just scale, but kind of really hit that tipping point to be sort of more mainstream. and accept it. I think that's the biggest thing that we're going to have to get across, because those of us that are geeky are always going to go beyond the tech, right? I think, I definitely think it's the human aspect, the the cultural part.
Okay, well, I think that brings us close to the close of the panel. Melanie, did you have any other thoughts about that? Not sure if she's still on voice.
I've had lots of thoughts actually, but the point is that the other speakers here have basically taken the words right out of my mouth.
And that rarely happens.
We seem to be in a very, very tight consensus over what needs to be done and can be done, and even how it should be done.
Yeah, which I think
that's a pretty good indicator that we're on the right track.
Yeah, no, I think that's good, and a good indicator. Obviously you're seeing a panel of people that we all worked very closely for a solid year preparing the Open Simulator Community Convention. So in some ways, though this panel was brought together for today's talk, I think we've had lots of discussions and on this, and I think it's been wonderful, and I hope in a lot of ways, if we welcome anybody else to kind of in on this as well. So.
Definitely. Well, I would like to thank everyone on the panel, and definitely a great thanks to the audience. There were actually really fantastic conversations happening in the chat, both in world and on the stream. So thanks to everyone who provided comments, questions, and shared resources. I'd also like to thank the organizers of VWBPE and all the folks working to make the conference a success, and to the streaming folks. And thanks everybody for your patience with any technical challenges. It's always fun being a pioneer in these environments. So thanks everyone. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and we will look forward to seeing you in November at the OpenSim Community Conference. Have a great day.
I'd like to add my thanks to Fleep and Mal and Joyce and Letty and Melanie and Pet Love for doing a really wonderful job and making my job easier as the moderator. So thank you all very much. Lots of food for thought and many hurdles to go, but not insurmountable. Thank you all very much. Not insurmountable. Thank you all very much.